Chapter 52, Public Declaration. The house with the big windows was still mostly empty, the scent of fresh paint and salt air mixing with the lingering aroma of the coffee Alexander had made at dawn. We were in the Hamptons, but not at the fortress. This house was smaller, a modern structure of glass and light tucked into the dunes, where the only security perimeter was the natural rise and fall of the sand. There were no cameras in the hallways, no biometric locks on the bedroom doors. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window in our bedroom, looking at the gray Atlantic. I was wearing a silk robe, the gold band on my finger catching the morning light. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waking up to a battle. I was waking up to a choice. "It's time, Maya," Alexander said from behind me. I felt his heat before he touched me. He wrapped his arms around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. He was dressed in a dark suit, the first time he'd worn one since we left Switzerland. He looked like the Alexander Blackwood the world knew, but the way he held me was entirely new. There was no possessiveness in his grip, only a deep, anchoring devotion. "The live stream starts in 2 hours," he continued, his voice a low vibration against my neck. "Marcus says the viewership projections are higher than the Super Bowl. The whole world is waiting to see if the sterling girl finally escaped or if the billionaire finally won." "I did escape," I whispered, turning in his arms. "I escaped the cage you built, and the one my father built, and the one the world tried to put me in." I reached up, tracing the sharp line of his jaw. "But they don't know that. They still think I'm a victim, Alexander. They still think you're the monster." "Let them think what they want about me," he growled, his eyes darkening with a familiar, protective heat. "As long as they know the foundation is yours, as long as they know the science is free." "No," I said, my voice hardening with the sterling fire. "That's not enough. This isn't just about the science anymore. It's about us. I'm tired of being a headline, Alexander. I want to be a truth." I pulled him into a kiss. A slow, deep, and searingly honest kiss that tasted of our shared history and our promised future. Today was the public declaration. The day we would stand before the world and tell them that the locked-in contract wasn't the end of our story. It was just the prologue. Alexander POV. Driving back into Manhattan felt like entering a lion's den, but for the first time, I wasn't the one holding the whip. I sat in the back of the SUV, Maya's hand gripped in mine. We were heading to the Sterling Blackwood Center, the tower that used to bear only my name. Outside the tinted windows, the city was a blur of motion, but inside the car, the air was still. Maya was wearing a suit of deep violet, the color of royalty and revolution. She looked lethal. She looked like the woman who had dismantled an international conspiracy with a single upload. And as I looked at her, I realized that my greatest claim wasn't the tower or the billions. It was the fact that this woman chose to stay when she had every reason to run. "The board members are already there," Marcus said from the front seat, his voice tight with anticipation. "And the press corps is at capacity. Every major network is carrying the feed." "And my mother?" I asked. "She's issued a final statement through her lawyers. She's claiming she was misunderstood. She's trying to distance herself from the Sato contracts." "She can try to distance herself all the way to the moon," I said, my voice returning to that lethal, clinical tone. "But the data doesn't lie. And today, the data becomes public record." We pulled up to the plaza. The crowd was a sea of people, protesters, supporters, and the ever-present swarm of vultures with cameras. Security formed a human wall, but as we stepped out of the car, the noise was a physical assault. "Alexander, Is the marriage a fraud? Maya, tell us about the locked-in clause. Who owns the science? I kept my arm around Maya's waist, my presence a shield, but she didn't lean into me. She stood tall, her head held high, her gaze fixed on the entrance. She wasn't the advisor anymore. She was the CEO. We entered the lobby and headed straight for the auditorium. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the electric hum of 100 servers. Are you ready? I whispered as we reached the wings of the stage. Maya looked at me, her hazel eyes bright with a fire that made my heart thud. I've been ready since the first night you tried to own me, Alexander. Now, I'm going to show them what it looks like when I own myself. She stepped onto the stage. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a world holding its breath. Maya POV. The lights of the auditorium were blinding, but I didn't blink. I walked to the center of the stage and stood behind the podium. In front of me was a wall of cameras, their lenses like the eyes of 1,000 judges. Behind them, the global audience was watching through the lens of a dozen live streams. I didn't look at the teleprompter. I didn't look at the notes Marcus had prepared. I looked directly into the main camera. My name is Maya Sterling, I began, my voice clear and unwavering. And for the last month, you have been told a story. You've been told a story about a billionaire who bought a woman's soul. You've been told a story about a locked-in contract, a corporate theft, and a global scandal. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over the room. Most of that story is true. Alexander Blackwood did write a contract that attempted to secure my mind and my time. My father's work was stolen, and my family was ruined by the very people who claimed to protect us. I saw the reporters leaning in, their pens flying across their pads. But there is a part of the story you don't know, I continued, my voice growing stronger. Because you cannot lock in a truth. And you certainly cannot lock in a human heart. I gestured to the wings. Alexander stepped out into the light. He didn't come to the podium. He stayed 5 feet away, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on me. He was the consultant, the partner, the husband. The man standing behind me is not the monster the headlines have created, I said, turning to look at him for a second before returning to the camera. He is the man who realized that power is an empty room if you're the only one in it. He is the man who resigned his position, gave away his fortune, and risked his life to ensure that the science of healing would never be a secret again. I held up my hand, the gold ring shining under the spotlights. We were married 3 days ago, not because of a contract, not because of a debt. We were married because we realized that the only thing worth claiming in this world is the person who makes you brave enough to be yourself. The room erupted. Shouts, questions, the blinding strobe of 100 flashes. I held up my hand for silence. From this moment forward, the Sterling Blackwood Foundation is a public entity. The locked-in era is over, the science is free, and as for our personal lives, the room is closed, the truth is out, and we are finally, truly ours. I turned away from the podium and walked toward Alexander. He didn't wait for me to reach him. He stepped forward and pulled me into his arms, his mouth finding mine in a kiss that was a final, absolute declaration to the world. We weren't a scandal. We weren't a headline. We were a revolution. Alexander POV. The walk out of the auditorium was the longest and most satisfying walk of my life. The press was a roar, but we didn't stop. We didn't answer a single question. We walked through the lobby, our hands interlaced, our heads held high. The world was screaming for a piece of us, but we were already gone. We reached the car and slid into the back seat. The door closed, and the silence of the luxury SUV returned, but it wasn't the pressurized silence of the morning. It was the silence of a victory so absolute it didn't need words. "You were incredible," I whispered, pulling Maya into my lap. "I was me," she said, her voice a low, melodic vibration. "The version of me that doesn't have to hide anymore. The version I've been waiting for my whole life." I kissed her again, a long, deep, and searingly intimate kiss that tasted of the future. The public declaration was done. The world knew the truth. The fallout was settling. "Where to now, Mrs. Blackwood Sterling?" I asked, my thumb tracing the line of her lower lip. "Back to the house," she said, her eyes darkening with a sudden, sharp desire. "We have a Tuesday night pizza to finish, and a room that needs a lot more than just a fresh coat of paint." I let out a low, guttural groan and signaled to the driver. "Fast as you can, and Marcus." "Yes, sir." "The phone is going in the Atlantic the moment we cross the bridge. Don't call me unless the world is actually ending this time." Maya POV. The drive back to the Hamptons was a blur of golden afternoon light and the soft hum of the tires on the pavement. Alexander was quiet, his head resting on my shoulder, his hand in mine. He looked at peace. The Titan was finally at rest, and the man was finally home. As we crossed the bridge and the scent of salt air filled the cabin, I looked at the ring on my finger. The locked-in contract was a memory. The fallout was a foundation. The claim was our reality. But as the sun began to set over the dunes, casting a long, orange glow over our new house, I realized that the story wasn't over. It was just beginning. We were no longer separate targets. We were a single, unbreakable force. And as Alexander led me into the house, the vigil of justice, notebook tucked under his arm, I realized that we were ready for whatever storm came next. Because we weren't just survivors. We were the ones who owned the fire. And the world was never going to be the same. Alexander POV, midnight, the Hamptons. The house was quiet, the only sound the rhythmic thrum of the ocean below. Maya was asleep in our bed, her dark hair a silk tangle against the white pillows. The moonlight was reflecting off the waves and dancing across the ceiling. I sat on the deck, the notebook in my lap. I opened it to the very last page. Under Maya's entry, "The man who set her free," I wrote one final line for Act IV. The public declaration, ours. I looked at the house, at the big windows, at the woman sleeping inside. I was Alexander Blackwood. I had lost an empire, a name, and a reputation, and I had never been more successful in my life. I stood up and walked back into the bedroom. I didn't look at the clock. I didn't check the time. I just lay down beside my wife and closed my eyes. The locked-in era was over. The claim was complete. And for the first time in 34 years, the room was exactly where it was meant to be. Full, Maya POV, end of chapter 52. I woke up to the sound of the birds. The sun was rising over the Atlantic, a brilliant, unshielded gold. Alexander was standing by the window, his silhouette dark against the light. He looked like the man I had first met, the ruthless billionaire. But as he heard me move, he turned. The expression on his face was one of absolute, unshielded love. "Good morning, partner," he said softly. "Good morning, Alexander." I sat up, the sheet falling to my waist. "Is it time?" Time for what? Time to start the rest of our lives. Alexander walked over to the bed and pulled me into his arms. He kissed me, a long, deep, and rawly honest kiss that tasted of the future. "I've been waiting for this moment since the gala," he whispered. "Me too," I said. We walked out of the bedroom, hand in hand. The locked-in era was a memory. The public declaration was our truth, And as we stepped out onto the beach, the world was ours to explore. Together. Next chapter. Chapter 53, Private Reunion.